Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. Hope everyone's doing okay in their various situations around the world. What I thought I'd do to start off was to get everyone situated with a working license of Fusion and hopefully running on your computers, whether personal laptop, desktop computer, whatever you have. Fusion is potentially a very flexible program. It can run on Mac, it can run on Windows, and you don't necessarily need a really high-powered computer to do some projects on it. We'll go through some of the system requirements as well as how to register your license for Fusion, what the different licenses mean and what you can do with them, and then we'll jump into the Fusion interface and start looking at some of the different parts of navigation, where the different menus are, and some of the settings you might want to check out when you begin. Okay, so if we go to just looking at the system requirements for Fusion, it can be a pretty basic startup requirement. Okay, you can run on Mac. We're up to Catalina now, I suppose. Windows 7 and 8 are still supported. Windows 10 is better. They're going to be supporting that version of Windows for much longer. 7 and 8 are kind of being phased out by many developers. They're suggesting here to have a 4-core processor. Most newer computers in the last 5 years are going to have a 4-core processor, Mac or Windows. Doesn't matter if it's Intel or AMD. 4 gigabytes of RAM is going to be a nice thing to have. If you have more, that's even better. But that's the bare bones that they're suggesting here. A dedicated graphics card is a good thing, but I've run this on computers without a dedicated graphics card, and it's done okay. You want to make sure you do have some just hard drive space or SSD space, whatever you got on your computer. If we are running models or making projects that are a little more complex, or if you ever want to do rendering on your machine, you're going to want more power to do that. So they're talking here a 3 gigahertz processor, maybe even more cores. We can talk more about if that matters so much. More RAM and a dedicated graphics processor, a graphics card. I don't recommend anyone go out and get or upgrade their computers just to do this stuff right now. If you're learning, there's no reason to spend money doing what we're doing. With the projects that I'm hoping to bring to you, we should be able to do this without having to use a crazy, intense computer. So let's look at, all I have is an old MacBook to show you where you could check your system requirements. So let's see. If we go to the top left of our Mac, go to About This Mac, we can check out, go to More Info, see some more specs on our machine. Okay, I've got a 2.6 gigahertz processor. It's a 2-core. This thing is more than 10 years old now, so 4 gigabytes of RAM was really wild back then. There's no dedicated graphics card. Would I run Fusion on this computer? Probably not, but I suppose we could. So let's go back to Windows. You can see if I open up Explorer, just File Explorer, and in Windows 7, this is going to look the same thing, just open up like a folder. And over to the left, you'll see My Computer or This PC. If I right-click on that, and I go to Properties, okay, I can see the specs on my computer. Remember, we're just looking at this to see if we're going to meet those bare minimum requirements. Again, if you don't, and you just want to follow along, of course, hang out with us, please. Okay, so I've got a 3.8 gigahertz processor, 64 gigabytes of RAM, plenty of hard drive space in this machine, as we can see. This computer is going to be okay, and I do throw some crazy things at this machine in particular, so I'm not too worried about it. Although I will say my 12-core CPU on this machine really doesn't do that well in Fusion, because Fusion, most of the work you're going to be doing really only uses 1 or 2 cores at a time. The way the workflow processes information, it's kind of bottlenecked by that single processor. So if you have a faster core clock that's these weird gigahertz numbers, if this number is higher, you're going to be fine. But if you have, 24, 32 core, some crazy video editing rig. It'll probably run fine, but I think for value, fewer cores, higher core clock is going to be fine. Okay, enough nerdy stuff. We're going to save that for what we're really here for, the CAD. Just wanted to show you guys where to look for your specs and see if you can expect to have performance on your machines at home. Last thing to just touch on as we're looking at specs is your internet connection. Fusion is sort of a semi-cloud-based software. That means to run it, you don't have to be connected to the internet at that moment, but occasionally Fusion will want to be connected to the internet in order to check licensing, frustrating things like that. Like, are you allowed to use this product? That's kind of what we live in now, much like Adobe. But what's cool about Fusion is it will save your files in the cloud. And then if you say, open up a different computer with Fusion on it and sign in, those files and those projects will be accessible from another computer. All you have to do is click on them and they'll load from the cloud. And so it's a cool way to work either between like a studio and home or home and office, or even between like teams working on a project. You don't have to be emailing files or checking versions to see if you guys are all working on the same page. Well, I've worked in shops in the past where we've had one Fusion kind of folder of projects that we could see who made what changes at what time and why we made them. It's a really cool way to track things. And it worked again between Mac and PC, and we didn't have to worry about Dropbox or Google Drive. Those things work great. Also use those things if you're working between teams, but the cloud all on one piece of software is handy, I think. So let's talk about licenses. I'm going to be talking a lot about an educational license because I've been a student or teacher kind of throughout my time of learning Fusion, the past 5 going on 6 years now. So I've been eligible for this license. I of course don't suggest that people who aren't eligible use this, but you do get some more perks out of having the educational license, along with some other Adobe products, or not Adobe, excuse me, Autodesk products that are out there. Adobe does have perks, but I'd say it's another live stream. If we just search for a Fusion 360 download, the first link you might get is these kind of 3 separate licenses. You'll see personal use, commercial use, educational use. Personal use and educational use, these both kind of have this caveat that you're not making money with them, or more specifically for the personal use, last I checked, it was if you're not making more than $100,000 a year using this software, you're eligible for that personal use license. Okay, they're each for 1 year at a time. You can extend them as you need. Okay, so if you don't have an account, you're going to go to create account and go ahead and fill this stuff out. Just be as clear or not as you want. It's gonna make you answer certain questions. You want to use an institutional email address though, one that does have a .edu or .org, whatever it is, your school or institution that you're teaching or learning from as a student or educator. Just fill that stuff out. What I found is after you go through this process, it takes a while to actually receive your license information. So if I'm going to post this video this evening, and maybe folks on Instagram will catch it today, maybe not. If you do catch it, that'd be great. I would go ahead and fill this stuff out and get it going through the pipeline of whatever the black box of the internet is with sending emails from automated sources. But I jump on this. That way you can follow along in future videos if you want. But all the videos that I'm going to be posting will be saved, so you can check them out in the past, go through certain highlights, and focus on what you want to focus on. I would encourage trying to have the software so you can try this stuff out. I think the best way to learn is by jumping in and doing, and getting lost and getting found, asking questions. Yeah, so I encourage you to try to get a license going. Reach out to me if you have any problems with that. I do just know that it does take, sometimes it takes people 10 minutes to get a response back. Sometimes it's longer. I really don't know why. I don't think it has anything to do with institutions. I just think it's kind of a rolling the dice. Okay, so let's open up Fusion. When you open up for the first time, it's going to ask you to log in. I'm already logged in, but if someone else is logged in, say on the machine you're using, if it's like a shared computer, hopefully there's not a lot of that right now, sharing keyboards and stuff. But if you do see someone else's name up here in the top right, you're going to want to click on that name, click sign out. Once you're signed in, you'll probably end up with like just a blank window. This panel over the right probably won't have a lot of things in it either. But let's start exploring. Let's jump in. The main interface, this is like your canvas. Okay. Unlike Adobe products, if you've used them before, there's kind of separate windows that are all sequestered, you know, with kind of boundaries, like a lot of software has too. There's like columns and rows, and like things are gridded out. Fusion's kind of permeable. If you can see, like some of these menus, my canvas, my workspace kind of can flow behind or into them. Just wanted to, you know, throw that out there because things can kind of also get lost as you move them around, like other pieces of software. So one of the more flexible menus that has a lot of important information and you don't want to say accidentally drag off into the abyss is the browser. We can dock it if it does get lost. You see this green here. Okay, we can hide anything with these expansion arrows as we see when we get into some other menus. You can either expand or contract for more or less information. And anything with these little arrows on the right, you can click and drag away. Okay, so that's the browser. The browser has kind of like your building blocks of whatever it is you're working on. Depending on what you have already inside of your project, you'll see more or less of these folders here. You can see there's an eyeball and like a kind of grayed out eyeball with a line through it. This should be familiar to folks familiar with Photoshop or Illustrator stuff. This is like a hide show command. Anything within that folder, if you hide or show, it will go away or come back. If we expand any of these with these little carrots, we can see there's things inside of these folders. And we can individually hide or show those objects. Okay, there's different icons for, it's a shorthand for different kinds of objects. We'll see there's different workspaces within Fusion that have kind of different types of CAD files inside of them. Fusion can host and work with different kinds of 3D objects, 3D data, and you'll see that they're represented often with these little icons or colors. Okay, if you right-click on any of these things, you can get a lot of more options and information. We can find out more if we go to properties of something. We can find out its area, its density, its mass, its volume. Right now we have a material assigned to it. We have an appearance assigned to it. Physical material and appearance are different things. Okay, lots of kind of crazy, intricate information here. It's pretty cool. If I click on this other object that has this little orange open loop, you can see it's a little bit different. It doesn't have a center of mass in this case. Now, why is that? If we just look at it, if we isolate it from the other objects, we can see it kind of looks like a cookie cutter almost. And this object is sort of infinitely thin, but it does take up space. So it doesn't really have like it's not watertight. It's not a solid object. All of these other objects we're looking at are solid, whereas this cookie cutter shape has no thickness. So we call this as a surface. It can be open, you can even have a closed surface, but that sort of changes the definition to a solid. Most of the things that we're going to be working on are solids, and solids are represented when they're bodies as this little gray white cylinder. Okay, so these are solid objects, and just to prove that, I want to show if we were to slice this in half, we can see that there's stuff. There's like this hatch mark. There's like material all in here. Okay, that could be air, it could be water, it could be ceramic, it could be brass, whatever it is. There's like solid material around there. Now, if we turn on our surface and we look at that in this section view, we can see there's, just what we saw when we looked at it from the top. There's nothing inside of that really. So notice when I turn that section on, we got this other folder pop up called analysis. And we have this little section analysis. We can turn that off, and that basically hides that section view. Sort of like a double negative. If we hide the half, we get the whole. So, okay, I'll try to avoid riddles as we go through. Other things in the browser, you saw me turn on and off this origin. The origin is, as it sounds, it's kind of where things begin. This is our 0, 0 point. We have axes that come with it, that intersect at this point. We also have 3 planes that intersect at this point. Okay, our origin, 0, 0, 0, X, Y, and Z. I'm gonna turn that off. Blank space floating out here, that kind of makes me disoriented. I'd like to have something to look at. If we check out this next folder where it says canvases, now you can say, well, what happened? Why is it pixelated? Where did our object go? I've taken some JPEGs, some raster images, and dropped them into CAD to act as a sort of guide for me as I'm modeling these things. We can see those are simply pictures. It's like a piece of card with a print on it. We can bring into 3D space and we can model around it. I've just lined these up with our origin, trying to find kind of the base of this object as I'm drawing. Okay, we're going to look at this a little more when we jump into actually drawing something, but sometimes I like to work with reference images just as a way to get started or learn. So bringing in an actual image to work with is a lot handier than like looking at something, looking at the screen, looking at something, looking at the screen. That's fine too, of course. We're going to turn off canvases, and now I'm going to open up sketches. Turn my origins off. Now you can see the eyeball in sketches is on, but when I look in my canvas, my workspace, there's nothing going on there. So why is that? If we open up the sketches folder, inside of there, all of these objects are hidden. And that's kind of like a housekeeping thing that Fusion does, is as we work, Fusion helps us hide our sketches. Now these sketches start to resemble, if we turn them all on, almost like a skeleton outline of what we're going to be hoping to get with our model. Now I don't draw all of these sketches at once. What's kind of cool is each of them has, for the most part, reference to one that came before, if not more sketches that came before. We'll get back to relationships as we go on. I'm going to turn these back off. I see backwards our progression. These sketches are two-dimensional vectors. Truly they're vectors for the most part, just like you would see in Adobe Illustrator. If you've used Illustrator, you've used CAD. Now, what we do different in software like Fusion when we're working on three-dimensional things is we have multiple vectors at different planes, different points in space with 3 axes. So this is 0, 0. This has its own point in space. This has its own point. If we turn on another sketch, this is its own XYZ point. And we can build three-dimensional geometry using these sketches. So say if we just wanted a cylinder, we start out to make a cylinder, we start with a circle. And we're looking at this as it's foreshortened. So if we drag it, our workspace up, we can see it's a circle. So that can become a cylinder if we so wish. To prove that, we can turn it into a cylinder. Okay, it's a very simple example, but I hope that starts to illustrate what's going on with our sketches. Construction is a little bit like our origin. And you can say, well, why do I need 2 more planes? We've already got these 3 planes. Well, sometimes these 3 planes, they're intersecting perpendicularly at 90 degrees. Sometimes you need angles that are other than 90 degrees. In fact, much of the objects in the world are not built perfectly perpendicular to each other. This is not, Legos or Minecraft or something. If we open up the construction folder and show some of these objects, we can see that I put 2 intersecting planes. They are at 90 degrees to each other, but they're 45 degrees to some of our other planes here. And if we go through, you can see there's even some more construction planes that ended up being formed along with the rest of our project. notice that these two construction planes work a lot like our canvases. Canvas here meaning the objects or the images that we brought in from outside source to work as reference images. So I placed these at 45 degrees to the origin because these reference images are pretty much already given to us from an isometric view or that 3/4 view. So I wanted them to resemble that in the CAD space too. Okay, so that's our browser. There's a lot of stuff that can be and live in the browser. Let's go down because I've been jumping down here a little bit. I don't want to leave this out. This is our like kind of navigational tools and viewport tools. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, and a 3-button mouse is one with a little wheel in the middle. If you're using like a laptop, please don't give yourself, like a hard time using your hands with like a touchpad. You can do it. I had a boss who insisted on doing CAD with just like a laptop and a touchpad. You can do it, but I'd try to get a 3-button mouse. I mean, you can get them for like $8 at, well, let's not go shopping these days, but hopefully you can scrounge one up. If not, things can be done on a laptop. And down here, you're going to want to get to know these tools in any case, but especially if you are using a trackpad. So I've been just kind of moving around without telling y'all how I've been doing these different movements. But there's a couple different, I guess, gestures in navigation as we navigate 3D space on a computer. Okay, this is the nerdy stuff we were excited about, not computer specs. So the first, if we just look at our menu here, is orbit. Now when I click on orbit, it kind of brings up this faint, I don't know if y'all can see that, this faint kind of compass. And if I hover over the edges, it changes my cursor to different loops. If I'm just in the middle of it, I get this kind of what we would call a gimbal. It almost looks like two like cartoon characters fighting in like a ball of like dust. This kind of cloud of different axes turning around each other. So if I have this orbit clicked and I click and drag, okay, wherever I started my clicking was kind of our anchor point. And as I click and drag and hold, I'm going to orbit around that anchor point. If I do find these edges, okay, it's going to constrain my orbit to a singular axis at a time. Okay, with this drop-down menu, we can see we can have a free orbit, or we can have a constrained orbit. It really just, we're going to be looking for these handles on the edge. Okay, if we want to get out of orbit, we can click on another tool. Or you can hit escape. Escape does a lot of good things to get us out of trouble. I'm going to jump over look at right now. I'm going to jump to the pan tool. So we have constrained orbit or free orbit, or we have the pan tool. It's the little grabby hand. So our cursor changes. We can notice that it's not only activated when it's blue, but our cursor changes. So pan is clicking and dragging. It's just a way to move left, right, up, down, any combination in between. Okay, if we're in somewhere and we're like selecting a bunch of stuff, using pan is going to be really handy when we're trying to get in close and maybe get some details. Okay, so our next tool, right on down to the right, is zoom, selected in blue, and our cursor changes to what looks like kind of a scroll wheel up and down. If we click and drag now, we're going to zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. Okay, depending on how your mouse is set up, it might be up is zoom, might be down is zoom. Just have to kind of experiment. Okay, this next tool is fit. I use this all the time. We're all going to get lost in 3D CAD space at some point. I get lost a lot, and when I do, I like to click fit because it just takes whatever's in my scene and fills my screen with it kind of to a reasonable amount. So say I was looking at something really, really tiny, and now I'm just lost. I'm like, I don't know, like, what is this? What is this? This is just crazy. I'm lost. I'm frustrated. We go over here to fit. Okay, we might be a little jumbled around and disoriented, but now we're pretty close to at least understanding where we are relative to other things. So that's fit. And if we see the drop-down menu, there's also zoom to window. So now we can click and drag a marquee, and we can just select certain features. Rather not select, but we can look at them a little more closely. So if we click this arrow, we're going to go back to Fit. Notice there are some hotkeys listed next to any of the tools in Fusion. Not any of the tools, but many of the tools in Fusion have hotkeys. I don't like to teach folks with hotkeys, but they're here. I might bring them up as we go forward, but I'm going to be clicking on stuff, and we're going to be looking at menus together. Okay, I mentioned this Look At tool. When I click on it, nothing happens. You're saying, well, I'm already looking at it, right? Well, we need a little more information when we ask Fusion that question. What is it we want to look at? Now, this model is pretty simple as far as angles go. Like I'd say all of the flat faces kind of align with any of the major planes, X, Y, and Z, these origin planes that we were talking about earlier. But what Look At can do is if we have a plane, a flat plane in question, not a curvilinear surface, but a flat plane somewhere in our model, not those origins, but somewhere else in our model. If we go to Look At, if we have that object or that plane selected first, and we click Look At, it will align our screen to be exactly coplanar or aligned with that surface. Now, if I select one of these roundy surfaces and try to look at, it's going to average it out. In this case, because this curve works a certain way, it's going to try its best. But I think this tool is really best thought about for flat planes. If you can find a flat plane, it'll align that to the screen. I don't really know what it's aligning to when I select this curvilinear surface. Okay, so those are our tools down here. Now, over here on the right, we have kind of our view options. We've talked about navigation is on the left side. Over here are view options. So display settings, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. I'm not going to go in full screen mode, but that's kind of the first one you see. The rest of these are really, I encourage you to play with as your eyes enjoy them. I will jump a lot between, under visual style, between shaded and shaded with visible edges only. I do that because with the kind of CAD we're doing, these edges are really helpful pieces of data or like information that we'll want to use to do other things with. So if I can't see those, it makes my life a little bit more difficult. If we hover over something, we can grab those same edges or planes or faces, whatever they are. We just kind of have to have an idea of where they are to begin with. So shaded with visible edges only is something I commonly use, but I'll also go to shaded with hidden edges. Now, what are hidden edges? We get a little bit, this isn't the best model to show this, but we get a little bit of the power of X-ray vision. We can see the bottom of the sink in this dotted line. In CAD and in like drafting, a dotted line usually means like you've been granted the power of X-ray vision. This dotted line means that thing, whatever it is, that object, that edge is somewhere behind what we're looking at in front of us. Just to really reinforce this, if we go to wireframe, this can be really kind of loud, noisy, jumbled, cluttered workspace, but we see through everything. We get all of the edges all at once. We can see what's in front of us, but we can also see what's like way behind us. There's also wireframe with hidden edges, and that might be a little quieter in a workspace. You don't have all the shading and the colors. You get some idea of what's behind, what's in front, and just with the edges. And then there's wireframe with visible edges only, which looks a lot like shaded with visible edges only, just without all the kind of cute, colors, shading, materials, things like that. Mesh display, we're not going to worry about that. Environment, this is what I was saying about what feels good to your eyes. These are like different contrasts. Excuse me. I'm going to let you guys play with these. But there's kind of the white. The white it can be kind of hard to see things. I actually like to use gray room because it's just a little less bright, and I'm on the computer for hours. It doesn't kind of fry my brain with radiation, it feels like so much. This one's very sweet, this blue pool, tranquility blue, excuse me, infinity pool. That one, I don't know. I'll let you guys decide what works for you. But I'm just going to go back to photo booth. That's our plain white scene. Now here under effects, these effects can be useful modeling tools, to be honest. Like I just turned on shadow and reflections, ground reflections that is, ground shadow, ground reflection. That can help us kind of get a sense of grounding as we are trying to orient our minds into a virtual space. Sometimes having that shadow, it's kind of like having a horizon almost. It can kind of help you feel like you're on solid ground with the other stuff going on. These other things you can play with and kind of get the sense of what they do on your own as you start to model. But what a lot of them do is they're really just using a lot of your computer's, not a lot of, but some of your computer's resources, your hardware, to make things easier on the eyes. And they are potentially costly if your computer is already using a lot of its resources, or if it has few resources to give, these are going to be harder on your computer in running Fusion. Now that last one I clicked off, anti-aliasing, this is like, if you can run any of them, I would recommend running this because it just really hurts my eyes to see these jagged lines. What anti-aliasing is doing is, because our screens are divided into a grid of pixels, X and Y, anything that's a diagonal line that's not lined up with that grid will become jagged. So here we go. We see this vertical line and this horizontal line look fine, but this sweeping curve turns into these kind of jagged stair steps. So if we turn on anti-aliasing, we're smoothing out that curve. Okay, it still is a curve. It's just as like faithful to the geometry as it would be. It's just going to be easier for our eyes to experience. The computer doesn't really care. These other things, object shadow, ambient occlusion, they can be useful modeling tools. They can help you kind of get a sense of scale or depth. I like them because sometimes, you know, I'm working on something for a long time and I just need a little bit of encouragement that the thing looks real or pretty even. And that sounds trite, but I think they're useful to a degree. So that's under effects. Object visibility. Leave all these all work features checked for now. There are times when you'll just want to isolate this way. I usually use the browser to do things like this, but there are times when this is a little more surgical. Now camera, orthographic is going to be our friend for the most part. It's not how our eyes see. There is a lack of foreshortening in orthographic view, meaning if we were to measure this edge and this edge, which I know they're mirrors of each other, they should be the same. But if we're looking at it in this 3/4 view, what we would normally see with our eyes in the world is this front edge would be longer than this back edge. But in truth, on this screen, they're the same. So let's change that just to show you what I mean. If we go to perspective, now we can see this front edge is a little bit longer than this back edge. Okay, we can exaggerate that even more. Okay, so that's foreshortening. I guess here's an even more telling example. Is this front here is slightly longer than the back, even though the object doesn't taper. So we'll switch back to orthographic. You can see it now. It looks like it's almost short now, but it's these lines are parallel, which is also our way of telling us that we're looking at orthographic. Okay, switch between the two again. The reason I suggest using orthographic when you're doing design work is because you care about those relationships. You know, as you're measuring and modeling and adding relationships to things, you don't want to be kind of fooled into thinking one thing is not that thing. Now, that doesn't mean that perspective doesn't have uses. If you are at a stage in your design where you want to try to experience what this thing would look like in the real world with a pair of two eyes, perspective can help you kind of get an idea of scale and proportions and things in a different way, in like a more kind of, I think, aesthetic or relational way, not so much about the geometry of the thing. And then this ground plane offset, I wouldn't worry about it. It really just is looking at your lowermost object as far as I understand, and it's going to put that ground plane there. I would just leave that at the default. Okay, so our browser and our kind of view menu. Wow, we've gotten through so much. But this stuff's, you're going to be using this stuff more than anything. And this browser And here, these are kind of some of the tools that I think don't come with a lot of explanation, and they're kind of smaller, so they kind of, sometimes they're easy to lose and forget about. Now, just to round off our view and display tools, up here on the top right is the view cube. All Autodesk software has this kind of view cube somewhere in it. All of the Autodesk packages that I've used, Maya, 3ds Max, Mudbox, Recap, AutoCAD, excuse me. They all have this view cube. So it's like a handy thing if you're jumping between softwares, that if things look unfamiliar, at least that will be there to kind of guide you. If you click on any of these faces or edges or corners, it will align your view to whatever that is. Now, sometimes you get kind of upside down. If you click and drag on that cube, it can help orient you. It'll show your major axes too, Z, Y, X, and it'll name these planes as they relate to your model. Right now, the front of my object, because this is generally how we consider the front of a sink, part where we approach it, is labeled left. Now, what if that's actually not the left? What if I want that to be the front? Do I have to start over, scrap everything? Do I have to rotate the thing? There's easier ways to do that. So what I'm going to do is this little drop-down arrow. It's kind of a subtle little friend here, but when it glows blue, we can click on it. And I'm going to go to Set Current View as Front. Now notice that text there changed. Okay, now our left side is on the left of the sink. Okay, so that's part of the view cube. If we go into these other options, we can see we get that perspective option there as well. We can set other views as different things. We can set what the top of the object is. We can set what home is. Now, what is home? Let's go ahead and click on this icon that says home, or we can click go home. Okay, that was nice. It kind of gave us a basic general overview of the object. Generally, it's a 3/4 view, but you can set this home to be really anywhere. We could set our home to be, for whatever reason, we could set our home to be here. So now if I'm somewhere else working and I'm like, I really just want to go home, I'm tired, and go home. Okay, so we can change that. You might want it to be more meaningful than what we just did here. What I like to do is when I'm done with the model, or I'm like at a good stopping point, I'm ready to save and call it a day, I like to find the most representative view of an object that kind of gives me an idea of its depth, its proportions, and what it is. Because often when I'm opening files again, it's not so much what they're called, even though it's a good idea to name things meaningfully. It's what they look like that helps me kind of find my way back to them. So I like to find a 3/4 view. It might be the left front, it might be the front right, doesn't matter, up to you. We're going to go to Set Current View as Home in Fixed Distance or Fit to View. What's the difference? Fit to View is going to basically do fit and home in one move. So if we're like in here and now we go home, it's going to try to fill that screen as much as possible. If we were here and said Set Current View, Fit to View, and we hit home, it's still going to fill it up. Okay? Encourage you to experiment with that, play with that a little bit. Okay, so that's our viewport. I think as we get into working, we're going to start to play with our actual design ribbon or our other workflow ribbons, this toolbar up here, as we need them. What I like about things in Fusion, most of the tools, most of the commands, because these are commands. If you've used something like Rhino before, you're literally typing in like extrude or revolve or loft, those kind of things. Like they're like literary words. Fusion has both the language but also the graphics, and it is kind of heavy on graphics. If you hover over something, it will of course tell you what they are. If you hover it for even longer, it gives you a nice explanation and kind of picture of what that tool or that command is hoping to do. It might even tell you a hotkey. So here with extrude, we've got a little E in parentheses. That means if you hit E on the keyboard, you can begin to extrude something. Okay. I think these pictures are great. It's one of the reasons I really like Fusion for people who are learning for the first time. There is so much vocabulary involved with CAD that not only learning the words, but kind of learning the things that you need in order to accomplish that task or that command. So example, Loft is one of those tools that can be so powerful and fun and exciting, but if you don't know that you need like 2 different profiles, 2 or more sketch profiles, in order to loft something, it can be really frustrating to get started. So this little graphic, I think, shows this really nicely of what goes into it. And it's all drawn in the same kind of Fusion interface, so things should look familiar. Okay, just going through these. Now, if you don't see the same tools up here on your computer, it might mean a couple things. Your screen resolution might be more or less than mine, and things will be, kind of like scrunched or expanded, depending on kind of where you're at. But I've also saved some of these tools that I use a lot to my top bar here. So say like mirror is something you might not have on your toolbar. But if I go down to create, I can see there's even more things that aren't up here right now. We've also got rib, we've got web, we've got thread. We've got all of these just what we call primitives: box, cylinder, sphere, torus, coil, pipe. I don't have those listed up here because I just don't use them that much. I do use mirror a lot. So what I've done is I've clicked on these 3 dots and I've gone pin to toolbar. Okay, notice you can also change shortcuts, or you can change the keyboard shortcuts. If you like hotkeys, you can develop your own in Fusion. Okay, there's even more things down here that I don't have up there because there's just so much real estate that I'd rather keep for other things, but I know they're here when I need them. Okay, modify has got its own situation where, there's some tools up here that I use a lot, so I pin them up here. There's some that I don't use a lot, so they're down here. I'm actually going to pin appearance up here because I'm looking for it all the time. Okay. Assemble, construct, inspect, insert, select. All of these have more. If you just open up that drawer, if you want to think of it like that, it's a label that has even more tools inside of that drawer. Check it out if you like them, if you find you're using them a lot. Pin them up there. You can always unpin them. So say, mirror, I'm done with you. You can unpin and it goes away. Okay, I'm done with mirror. No more mirror. Now that's just within the design workspace. Now Fusion it's a software that's grown so much in the past 5 years. It is a really ambitious software, and then it tries to be this kind of all-in-one package that can do not only your 3D design, it can do rendering. If you want to make a photorealistic image of an object to try to get an idea of what it's going to look like in the world with actual materials, the rendering that goes inside of Fusion is pretty decent. We can talk more about it. What I really like about it is that if you don't have a computer with lots of hardware resources, you can also render through Fusion's cloud, through Autodesk's cloud rather. And if you have an education account, it is even easier to do so. And that way you can keep working on something else and your computer is not like catching on fire by trying to process all this stuff. And it's not locked up busy doing that. You can keep working on something else and come back to it. So the rendering I actually find to be a pretty amazing workspace. Animation, it's different than rendering. If you want to show like a mechanical assembly in motion as it relates to the joints or the kind of relationships that are happening if you're doing something mechanical, I think it's a good place for that. Simulation is probably the workspace I know the least about because I did not go to engineering school. It's what we call FEA, which, please someone if they know what that stands for, comment here. I've forgotten, but it's basically like structural analysis. Let's go ahead and click on. Yeah, there's structural analysis for different kinds of loads. There's thermals, that's a bullet going through something, that sounds scary. I don't know, lots of cool things. If you know how to set them up, Fusion can kind of crunch these numbers and figure out kind of what the effects of whatever those inputs will be. One thing I have used before that's kind of cool that I would like to keep exploring is shaped optimization. Say you're like trying to design a bicycle, and instead of using like, like a giant piece of like plywood, you could, draw your shape that you need it to be to like connect the wheels and connect the seat and the handlebars. And then you can say, well, there's a force, going in one direction or the other. And Fusion will kind of look at those loads and the materials that you're using and come up with a shape that is the most efficient. It's It's actually an AI process that will decide what is the most efficient amount of material that needs to be on this object in order to support those loads and those the things that it has to support. Again, not an engineer, not gonna pretend I know how to do that, but something fun to explore. Manufacture is kind of one reason I was drawn to Fusion, as far as going away from other software packages that I really got to know going into CAD, like Rhino and SolidWorks. Manufacture is how you can take your model and make it into like a 3D thing in the real world using CNC machines. Now, specifically, Fusion's really good at milling and turning. So milling and turning, that's like if you're using a router or a mill, that would be milling when you're cutting things out using a 3-axis. The tool is spinning and the table or the head of the machine are moving around, controlled by a computer, doing all intricate stuff. And then turning is if your object is spinning while a tool moves around it, again, controlled by a computer. So I have some really weird tool paths in here. This maybe isn't the best example, but this is like something I was doing on a project where this tool is cutting out a very specific part of this object only. But all those blue lines you can see are tool paths of where that tool is supposed to go. That, in this case, a hemispherical tool is supposed to touch material in order to cut it or remove it. So that's built into the same software that you drew the thing in. So if you change something here, you go back to manufacture and you recalculate this. So say let's recalculate that. Okay, it changed because I've changed the model. So that's really amazing. If you can imagine having your CAM package or this manufacture workspace in a separate document, or not only separate document, but separate piece of software from your CAD package, it can be really frustrating to like fix something, save it, export it into a file format that the CAM software can use, and then rebuild your tool paths. A lot of problems happen then. A lot of maybe miscommunications happen. Maybe there's one little misclick and things are not going so easily, or they've gone poorly. So it's really nice to have that in the same place. If you have access to a router at your school or makerspace, your job or whatever, I think it's definitely something to look forward to trying to use in this software here. Now, drawing, this is if you are making, well, let's go ahead and sure. If you want to make like a nice set of instructions of how to like put something together, say you want like to make your own IKEA furniture, Fusion can take your models, turn them into kind of nice simplified line drawings. Now, this is pretty simplistic. I'm not going to get into this too much today. But what is really useful about this is you can take dimensions off of your drawing to help show people something important about whatever the design is that you really want them to know. Okay, I'm just kind of making up nonsense here. But you can see the idea. These dimensions could be useful for communicating just the scale of something. If you want to figure out, a good way to tell someone how to ship something or package something or assemble something, it can be really useful. But also if like you're working with another shop who needs to build something for you, it's important to have numbers and dimensions along with whatever your design is. It comes with a lot of these default options here. I'll tell you the scale, I'll tell you when it's made, who made it, the title of the object, the project, which corresponds to my project folder here, which we'll talk about in a second. We're going on about 50 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon here. But you can fill out all of these things too with more or less information. It's important you tell them if it's in inches or centimeters, for example. It doesn't have to, use this, of course, but it's just nice to see some of those defaults. There's some really cool features that built in. This workspace has grown tremendously in the past couple years. So I encourage you to just know that that's there. Y'all might not be making shop drawings anytime soon, but it's really helped me. I had to make a project that was shipped flat to a client, and I wanted to make sure that they felt empowered to assemble this thing, because we all really cared about the project, but we wanted to try to save a little bit of money on shipping. So I mailed it to them flat, and I wanted to make sure they knew how to put it together. So I gave them some instructions that I drew in Fusion. Last couple things to look at. Those are our workspaces. Some other workspaces will show up. They're kind of secret workspaces. We'll talk about those maybe as we go along, but they're kind of extra. But Fusion can handle, again, like I said, lots of different kinds of 3D data. Think about these like different kinds of 3D data. Okay, what haven't we looked at is down here. This is the history ribbon. Okay, if we look at this, it's kind of like a playhead. Say like on Adobe Premiere or Final Cut or something. This is like where you are in your timeline. Now, if I walk this timeline back, I'm not changing like photographic unfolding of time. I'm walking back in like the history of how this thing's been built or put together. Each one of these little icons on this timeline is a feature. And if I drag it back, I can see I'm defeaturing this design until we're just left with maybe not a lot of anything. Okay, I can play forward and we can start to kind of grow or evolve our design. Because I've already gone through and made these features, we can make it look really easy here. Obviously, it's going to take a little more time, but that's how the history works. So what it means to us, why this history thing is really exciting, is if you need to make a change. So say the diameter of this knob is wrong. I made it too big. So if I control click or right click on it, control click should work on a Mac, but right click on a PC, and go to edit profile sketch. And you can see it gives us a couple different features to look at, mirror or extrude. Well, I know it's going to be from an extrude command. Oh, we were trying to edit that profile sketch. There we go. So I'm going to click on that right knob, edit profile sketch. We can change that to 1.5 maybe. Okay, smaller knob. If we hit finish sketch, it changed this one. And because this knob and this knob were related to each other with a mirror command, this one changed too. And notice when I click on some objects, these three little slash marks will appear over a certain icon in the timeline. So right now we're hovering over, we're clicking on this object. It's highlighted in blue. On the timeline, we get those three slashes above the mirror command. If I click back on this first one, now the history timeline is showing us three slashes above this icon, which says extrude. So that's kind of showing you we started from the right, went to the left. For whatever reason I decided to when I was drawing this, that's the way it happened. So we can change not only, let's see, where were we? There we go. A profile sketch, but also we can edit that feature. We can just right click on the thing we want to change, and it'll bring back up this feature dialog. A feature is what we do with a sketch to make it into three-dimensional, some kind of three-dimensional form. So we could have these holes go all the way through if we wanted to. Okay, if we hit OK, it'll recalculate that scene. Now let's say, well, whoa, maybe that was actually not what we wanted to do. If we go back to edit feature, we can click and drag, or we can give it a specific number. Okay, and then we have our new feature with an updated dimension. So remember, profile sketches are those two-dimensional things that build our drawing that can become features. And a feature is what we take those sketches and turn them into more three-dimensional solid or surfaces, or beyond that too. The main way we can work in history mode is if we ask Fusion to do so. If we right-click, this is in the browser, if we right-click on the name of our design, right now it's Sync V24, that's version 24. we right click on it, I can say do not capture design history. Now what's going to happen? We want to erase history for this project. It says the timeline and all design history will be removed, and further operations will not be captured in the timeline. So if we hit continue, Fusion's going to sort of flatten this file. If you want to think of it in like Photoshop terms, we're going to kind of do something destructive, meaning we can't go back in time anymore. We can't change that history on the fly. Now we do get some of these features, but they're no longer in history. They're just kind of identified as the things they are. We can't right click on them and change them. We can delete them, but that doesn't really change anything except for remove it. So working without history has benefits, but it also has limitations. We can talk more about the benefits as we go through, but I'm going to talk mostly about designing with history because this way of modeling, this parametric way of modeling, meaning based on parameters, is something really powerful if you want to change things or have things relate to one another. The intent to use parametric modeling gives us those options later down the road. So whenever I can, I like to do capture history. Now, if I went from something without history to history, do I retain that history? No, I don't. Nothing on my history timeline is there anymore, so I've lost it. If you do accidentally save over your file after you've done this, don't fret. If we open these 3 dots here, this is our data panel. I'm going to go back and find this file in my data panel. We can see now we have a V25. Now before we saw V24. So sure enough, if I click on that V25, I can see 11 seconds ago I saved it. My name, Alex Goss, saved it. I didn't annotate why I saved it, but I saved it. If we knew that something was wrong with this, we could go back to an older version, we could open that version, or we could promote that version. Now I already know that this is the version we want, so I'm going to promote it. Promote it makes it the active file that we're going to know and trust. Now I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open it again, that promoted version. Let's see what that does. Okay, that doesn't look great. Let's do it this way. Let's go ahead and open version 24, because we know that that one by name was the one we wanted. Okay, great. So we got all of our history back. I'm going to close this naughty 24, and I'm going to save this. We should be able to promote this. Why is it? Okay, we're just really adding the versions here. Well, long story short, we can say that we saved that other version. I'm going to say no this time. Yes, there we are. Okay, so the idea was no, not yes. So we didn't lose all that history. Because Fusion's cloud-based, we can go back in time and see all of the versions of this thing, back when it was a shower. Okay, sometimes I use certain designs for templates, more or less. We can even go on the web and look at these in a browser like Chrome and check these things out too. So say you don't have Fusion on a computer, you can open this up with your same Fusion account. You even get a little URL. You can go to myhub.autodesk, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and you can check out the different versions here. You can even navigate these in 3D space. Takes a little while to load, but you can check this stuff out in a browser too. So that cloud kind of can follow you wherever you need it to go. So this data panel has, if we click on home, it has all of my projects. If you like to see what you've been recently working on, that could be interesting. If we click home, we can go back. I like to sort things by projects, and inside of those projects, I keep folders. Okay, there we go. I keep folders. So I've got stuff that goes in the cabinet. I've got some outputs from a project I was working on. I've got some things that I was sending to the router, so I have them in their own folder. It's a nice way to stay organized. It's a lot like any file explorer, like Finder, or what you would use in Windows. You can give things icons. I don't do that a lot because it's just more work, but if you were to share something with somebody, sometimes it's a nice thing to do. And there's some other things that can follow you along where you go. Is under this assets are like libraries that say a company I was working for, we had certain tools that we used in our milling machine. So we had a list of those that was saved on the cloud. And don't use that a lot, but if you are working between computers, that could be nice. You don't have to like use something like Google Drive in addition to Fusion. You could just have the Fusion stuff. Now down here's what I really want y'all to look at before we part today is these samples. There's some basic training things that show really everything and anything that you could want to know about Fusion. It'll help you get your feet wet, as they say, and get you kind of oriented in the different workspaces. Okay, workspaces meaning design, render, animation, etc. There's even some other things we didn't talk about today in here. CAM, design, electric, generative, simulation. These are all samples that go further into those workspaces. If you're really into machining, CAM has really cool work examples of like how to even hold something to a machine while you're cutting it. Like that's kind of something that's nice to think about that you could also include in your router design. So here we got like, you know, the table of the milling machine or all the clamps and stuff. So that's a nice sample. Design samples, I guess there's a few things in there. They haven't updated this in a while, I guess. Okay, so that is the data panel. You can pin stuff. I like to kind of keep the things I'm working on at the top with this pin, unpin. A new project is going to make a new folder. If you're inside of a folder, or excuse me, we don't call these folders, we call these projects. We put folders inside of projects. If we want to make a new design, now we're up here at the top. Yours again might look a little bit different than mine. I have this icon key shot, don't worry about that. But what I want you to check out is this, just a new file icon like you would see in most softwares. You can make a new design, you can make a new drawing, you can open something, you can upload something, you can save something, export it 3D print, all these different things. We'll explore more in detail. Just know the difference between upload and open. Fusion can extract or use lots of different CAM information, but CAD information, excuse me. But there's kind of different ways to do that. They're a little nuanced sometimes. I'm going to close that data panel. Last thing I want to show you, I've said last a few times, but is just to check out your preferences. When you click on your name and open preferences, we can go through these a little bit before we get started. The only main change I've done here is under default orbit type and pan, zoom, orbit shortcuts. I've got free orbit and SolidWorks selected. That seems a little weird that I would have this like interloping software in here, but I have the SolidWorks navigation default set up because I'm a broken person, and I just spent so long in SolidWorks as I was transitioning into learning Fusion. It was just one more thing to learn and get used to, and I felt it was a more fluid transition to be just using the SolidWorks defaults. When we talk a little bit more about navigation, make sure you have the Fusion selected if you want to use the defaults, but I will try to avoid confusing you. I'll say it that way. I'm going to have the SolidWorks defaults on because I'd rather just work fluidly and not get bogged down in that stuff, so we can talk about the more fun stuff. But I guess with that said, try any of these. I think defaults are a good way to work as you're going from computer to computer. Your settings will follow you, but you never know. You might be helping someone else someday or vice versa. And if you don't have the defaults, it can kind of confuse people, as I probably have done tonight. So thanks again for following along. Please explore this stuff if you want. Let me know if you have any problems getting the license up and running. And I think next time we'll jump into our first project. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon.